I don't think there is any man who has done more than Jordan Peterson to wake up Canadians to the lunacy that's been happening in their name, and of course, that's why the left hates him so much. He was like a traditional, free speech liberal. But for the modern woke leftist, they're not liberal, they're illiberal. And if you defend free speech to them, well, you might as well be invading Poland. Anyways, I'm sure you know Jordan Peterson has been going through a legal struggle because the College of Psychologists in Ontario has been trying to force him into re-education, specifically social media training, so that he doesn't say naughty things that they don't like on the internet anymore. And Jordan Peterson took this to court, and he has lost his appeal in the case. And that says a lot more about the Canadian courts than it does about Jordan Peterson. Here's what he tweeted out. A higher court in Canada has ruled that the Ontario College of Psychologists indeed has the right to sentence me to re-education camp. There are no other legal avenues open to me now. It's capitulate to the petty bureaucrats and the addle-pated woke mob or lose my professional license. Congratulations, CP Ontario. You won this round. Mark my words, however. The war has barely started. There is nothing you can take from me that I'm unwilling to lose. So watch out. Seriously, you've been warned. So that sounds like a man who's not done fighting quite yet. And before we go any further, just a quick refresher. Here, this is from when it all started, back in January 22. I am being investigated by the Ontario College of Psychologists because of a complaint about this tweet, not submitted, by the way, by the person I responded to. Here is the tweet that Jordan Peterson is responding to. Based on the record of human behavior, we are already overpopulating this small world. Any arguments I have heard for supporting such a large human population completely overlook the huge loss of species and ecosystems resulting from our self-absorbed attention. Jordan Peterson responded, "You're free to leave at any point," which I think is a salient point considering this is somebody arguing for less human population. So when you're arguing for less humans on the planet, you shouldn't be shocked when someone says, "Okay, you first." Here's another tweet that got Peterson in trouble. Nazis, white supremacists, these simply do not exist in Canada. There's no culture of such things in Canada, political or otherwise. And that's just simply a statement of fact. There is no culture of such things in Canada, political or otherwise. Now, for the modern woke left, this is sacrilege. They have to exist. They must be there, or else what is their own purpose? And anyway, who do you think hit the TV remote? Now, here is probably the direst blasphemy. He dared to criticize dear leader Justin Trudeau. Then stop, puppet. Now, what's your end game, Justin Trudeau? Lay it out. Now, you may see these and just think, well, that's just obviously free speech. I mean, I can't understand possibly what the problem would be here. Well, the problem would be is that this is happening in Canada, and there's no First Amendment in Canada, I'm afraid. We have something called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it does say here, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't sound like Canada, not under Trudeau anyway. Well, that's because of the first part. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Section 1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that Section 2 doesn't actually exist. There's no may not in Section 1. It's more like, well, it depends how they're feeling about things, which makes the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms really the Canadian Charter of don't fucking piss us off. So this, obvious loophole right at the beginning of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has given rise to something called charter values. Here's a paper on charter values. It says, ultimately, the author concludes that charter values is an amorphous and ill-defined creation that undermines the important role of direct charter rights analysis while creating ambiguity and undue complexity for courts. tribunals, and other statutory decision makers. The concept and language of charter values should therefore be rejected. So, charter values are basically an excuse that a judge can use to deny you your charter rights, based on the reasonable limits part of Section 1. In other words, you don't have any real, concrete rights. You got a pair of dice, and you're throwing them every time you go into court, as Jordan Peterson has just found out. So let's go to this from the National Post. Here's Jordan Peterson. Bureaucrats will rue the day they tried to shut me up. The petty tyrants at the College of Psychologists of Ontario have no right to force me into re-education. In November 2022, the administrative board that regulates the conduct of psychologists, and much more than that, it turns out, decided that my political views were a disgrace to my profession, that of a clinical psychologist. I was therefore sentenced by that board, the Ontario College of Psychologists, to a bout of mandatory re-education of indeterminate duration at my expense, with my learning not evaluated by any standard method, but subject to the opinion of those charged with profiting by and exploiting my forced studentship. I took those decision makers forthwith to court and lost. The decision of the Ontario College of Psychologists was upheld. I then appealed to a higher court. On January 16, 2024, that appeal was rejected. There were no reasons provided. And I guess they didn't need to provide reasons because, well, it's just so obvious, isn't it? It's about punishing and humiliating somebody because they have politically incorrect ideas. Welcome to the leftist utopia, people. He said, this means that my legal options have been exhausted. Thus, I face two choices. I can comply when the college goes ahead with its determination to require my re-education, dutifully attend whatever bloody classes their DEI enthusiast, social media experts, whatever those are, determined to inflict upon, confess the sins of my classic liberal, conservative, or even Judeo-Christian political, philosophical, and theological commitments, repent and silence myself, or even become a standard bearer for the faux compassionate woke cause, at least publicly. Alternatively, I can tell my would-be masters to go directly to the hell they are so rapidly gathering around themselves and everyone else, lose my right to practice or even to describe myself as a psychologist, and suffer the consequences on the reputation front. Canadian psychologist Jordan B. Peterson, disgraced to his profession, forfeits his formal license in consequence of his crimes. And what exactly were those crimes? Because there's the rub, or at least one of them. This is where the reader should pay careful attention, Canadian or otherwise, because this is what lies ahead in the West, given the course our leaders and their still blind and deaf followers are charting. So these crimes, and these crimes being politically incorrect tweets, were reported on the publicly accessible Ontario College of Psychologists website Informer page, not by anyone who had ever been a beneficiary of my professional service, or any people that knew them, or any of the people directly criticized, or by anyone who knew them, or even, in the main, by citizens of Ontario, my home province, or Canada. They were instead brought to the attention of the authorities by activists in other countries, many of whom also lied in writing, claiming that they were in fact clients of mine. So people from other countries who he had never met, who lied about having been clients of his. Kind of feels like the whole thing's discredited right there, doesn't it? And this was about a dozen people that reported him. In contrast to the millions and now even tens of millions of people who have found the work I have done and the stances I have taken of clear psychological benefit, and who have said so, buying my books, watching my lectures, and even directly informing the college of their favorable judgment. So I guess at this point we can say that the Ontario College of Psychologists is not concerned with human well-being. They're interested in ideological purity. So he goes on to say that this doesn't actually affect him very much personally because he's independently wealthy and he has not been practicing since 2017 anyway. It appears that the point of all this is just simply to do what he's been doing since people first heard about him in the first place, which is fight creeping authoritarianism, something that benefits everybody, even those people who won't realize how wrong they've been until it's way too late. So essentially, he's warning us. Canadians, mark my words, your much vaunted Charter of Rights isn't worth the paper it's printed on, as one of its last remaining signatories has been continually striving to indicate. And he's talking about Brian Peckford, who has been telling Canadians that the Charter of Rights is not being used the way that it was meant to be. I mean, as if that wasn't obvious enough. But Section 1 pretty much guarantees that, unfortunately. Because with a corrupt regime like the Trudeau regime and a compliant judiciary, well, freeze bank accounts? Check. Vaccine mandates? Check. Remove right of mobility? Check. Censorship and, yes, re-education? Check. Peterson says, are you listening, Canadians? If you refuse to abide by rules so radically leftist that they would have been and were in fact eschewed until recently by the outright socialist Canadian New Democratic Party, your opinions have now become outright illegal. Present them, even think about them at your peril. And what is Peterson going to do from here? Well, he says, bring it on, you bloody pikers. Take your next steps, bureaucrats. Write me. Tell me how exactly we are to conduct my re-education. I'll play along, find out exactly what you will do. Now that you've been emboldened to do whatever it is that the darkest resentful demons lurking in your evil little low-level administrative hearts most truly desire, even to your own detriment. I'll see how burdensome playing your pathetic little game becomes, and I will publicize every single bit of it. Yeah, it sounds like he's still got some fight left in him, doesn't it? He says, you have won the battle, minions of the deep state. Faceless for now, but not for long, bureaucrat authoritarians. But you haven't won the war. And here's a warning too, as is only fair. So far, I've been constrained in my response to your pushing and prodding and overlord nagging by the requirement not to compromise my efforts on the legal side. But that's all over with now, isn't it? So there are no holds barred, as far as I'm concerned, and it may be that you have nothing better to do with your nasty, narrowly circumscribed, micromanaging bodies and souls than to cause me trouble. But we're going to perform that dance on the international stage, with all that light shining on your machinations, and you may well come to rue the day you attempted to take possession of my tongue. So they say that sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? And you know, in Canada, things have been happening in the institutional dark for far too long. And now that Canadians are seeing what's being done in their name, in the universities, even in elementary schools, even in kindergartens, in the judiciary, and certainly at the very top in the Prime Minister's office, they are waking up. Canadians are now waking up to the media manipulation. They're seeing pictures of the tampon dispensers and the men's washrooms on the Canadian military bases. So the agents of chaos that have infiltrated every Canadian institution are finally having a light shone on them and their works. And an ever greater number of Canadians are appalled by what they're seeing. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about that. Please subscribe, like, and share. Sharing really helps me out. I thank you for that. I will see you next time.